Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Friday, December 5th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Feeling socked in with all this fog? It turns out the San Joaquin Valley's recent foggy weather stems from rainy days last month.
When you have that extra moisture and then you have a calm weather pattern afterwards where there's light winds, that is a perfect recipe for fog to form.
A meteorologist breaks down Tule fog. That's coming up later in the show, right after these headlines. Two Valley legislators have reintroduced a bill in Congress that seeks to regulate biomedical laboratories in the U.S. This comes 2 years after a code enforcement worker in the city of Reedley discovered an illegal biolab. It contained diseases like COVID-19, malaria, and HIV. Officials called the discovery a national security issue. The bipartisan bill would mandate a federal review of high contaminant labs, and it would establish a central team to respond to suspicious lab activity. Governor Gavin Newsom says the Democratic Party needs to develop a new economic platform. Cap Radio's Laura Fitzgerald reports the governor spoke at the New York Times Deal Book Summit on Wednesday.
In an interview with New York Times financial columnist Andrew Ross Sorkin, Newsom described the recent election as a resounding resurgence for Democrats.
But I think there's a broader narrative that we have to address. That is, we have to be more culturally normal. We have to be a little less judgmental.
He said the Democratic Party needs a more compelling economic platform for both individuals and businesses in order to stage a larger comeback, specifically criticizing America's wealth inequality. In response to a question about whether he's considering a run for president in 2028, Newsom said he'd be lying if he said he never thought about his future. In Sacramento, I'm Laura Fitzgerald.
Many immigrants who currently qualify for CalFresh will soon be cut from the program. That's because of eligibility changes in the federal budget. Here's Alexis Fernandez-Garcia with the California Department of Social Services.
This means that many humanitarian immigrants will no longer be eligible for CalFresh. We will have to discontinue eligibility for an estimated 74,000 lawfully present non-citizens, and we expect the loss of benefits to be about $133 million each year.
Garcia says California is also facing nearly $4 billion in annual cuts to the program, which currently serves 5.5 million Californians. The CEO of a Fresno-based home health care company was arrested for defrauding the VA. The VA's Inspector General alleges Four Corners Health, LLC, obtained more than $7 million in VA payments for services it never actually provided, in some cases for patients after they died. Four Corners Health provided services in the Central Valley, and the CEO was arrested at San Francisco International Airport while attempting to board a flight to Nigeria. And the next time you fly out of Fresno Yosemite International Airport, you may be greeted by a big blue round bird. The airport unveiled its official mascot this week. Its name is Gordo, which means fat in Spanish. FAT is also the acronym for the Fresno Air Terminal. City officials celebrated the unveiling by taking selfies with Gordo, who wears a scarf and an aviator hat.
As 2025 comes to a close, KVPR hopes you'll consider the impact public radio has had for you in the past year, and that you'll consider starting a new monthly gift of support now. KVPR is 100% community funded for the first time in its history. That means the news coverage you depend on relies on all of us. Join now at kvpr.org or on the KVPR app.
And now to our main story. If you have been dreaming of a white Christmas, you might just get that this year, though it may not be snow, but fog. The San Joaquin Valley has been blanketed in thick Tule fog in recent weeks, leading to countless advisories from the National Weather Service. Many people have also taken to social media to post pictures and time lapses of the dense fog. But is this really so unusual? To find that out, today we're speaking with Anthony Edwards. Anthony is the newsroom meteorologist for the San Francisco Chronicle, and he starts our conversation by breaking down exactly what Tule fog is and how it forms.
Tule fog is just a special name for fog that occurs in California's Central Valley. It's a special kind of fog called radiation fog, which is the most common kind of fog throughout the United States. And this forms when, after a wet period, you have a lot of water near the ground and your temperature drops at night. And the first signs are you start to see dew forming on the grass. And then eventually the temperature drops far enough where you are at 100% humidity, meaning all that water vapor in the atmosphere condenses into little cloud droplets, and the fog sits just right above the ground, and it can be super dense. So it's a little bit different than the fog that people may be familiar with in San Francisco Bay Area in summertime. That fog forms when warm air blows over cool water, and then that causes the air temperature to drop, and it picks up the moisture, and then voila, there's fog. So these are two different kinds of fog. The summer fog in San Francisco is called advection fog, while the valley winter fog or Tule fog is radiation fog.
And why is it called radiation fog? Do we know the origin of that name?
Well, the heat is radiating away from the ground at night. So this sort of fog forms most often in winter when our nights are long and a lot of heat escapes to space or radiates away from the ground. So that's why fog is most common late fall into midwinter, because the nights are longest.
Okay, you have a recent report for the Chronicle in which you state that the National Weather Service has issued 9 dense fog advisories in November for the northern part of the Central Valley, specifically in the Sacramento area. And you confirmed that, no, this much fog isn't typical in that time period in your report. But can you walk us through just some historical data about when fog tends to occur specifically in our region of Central California?
Yeah, so actually, I wanted to add that there were 15 dense fog advisories in the San Joaquin Valley in November too. So it's been even foggier down south of Sacramento in Fresno and Bakersfield. And so the fog has been especially prevalent this year because there were some stormy periods earlier in November. I dropped a lot of rain and the ground just absorbed so much water. This is a little nerdy, but the soil moisture down from the ground to about a foot below the ground has been well above normal. And so when you have that extra moisture and then you have a calm weather pattern afterwards where there's light winds, that is a perfect recipe for fog to form because a lot of heat can escape to space. You don't have any winds mixing the air around, and then the fog just tends to sit and is trapped in the valley, the bowl that is surrounded by mountains to the west and east. And it doesn't really move until we get some winds or a storm to come.
Because you mentioned the soil moisture, we have so many crops we grow here in the valley. I'm curious how the fog potentially impacts agriculture here.
Well, the fog, like I mentioned earlier, it prevents solar radiation from reaching the ground, which basically means you're having those darker days. For temperatures, that keeps things suppressed. So that's especially important for crops because they need time to rest in winter. They're all summer, they're doing their thing, producing the food that we need. But then in winter, it's the dormant period. And so when it's dark and cold, they can produce better the next summer.
Okay, you hinted at this earlier, but I just want folks to know that there are satellite images from space that show the entire valley blanketed in white earlier this week. So I'm curious, are fog patterns pretty much typically the same across the entire valley, or are there like microclimates where things could be different?
Well, it really depends where we had the most rain, because you need the wet ground to sort of fuel this fog formation. And so storms actually targeted the southern part of the Central Valley, so the San Joaquin Valley, in November. And so then when you have that stagnant pattern that follows with, light winds, clear skies above, that allows that fog to form. So that's why the San Joaquin Valley's actually had more foggy days in recent weeks than, areas Sacramento and northward toward Redding. They've had a bit more wind actually to start December, so the fog went away for a couple of days, but this morning, talking Thursday here, it came right back and actually spilled all the way toward San Francisco Bay. So that fog is pretty stubborn, and when it gets going, it's hard to shake.
Yeah, so for all the people walking around asking, what's up with all this fog? It's basically because of those recent rains and then the subsequent conditions that have sort of created that system.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a good thing to look at when you're, comparing the year to year variations in fog. How much rain did we get before those foggy periods? And there tends to be a pretty strong relationship there.
Yeah, well, speaking of year-to-year changes, I did want to mention that I think folks from this area can recall denser fog in recent years. I know particularly in the 1980s, there was a lot of fog, that Tule fog rolling through. I even remember in the 90s, early 2000s, it always seemed foggier than it has in the last 5-10 years here. So can you take us back a little bit to what the fog was like at that time and why maybe on average it appears like we're seeing a decline, even though we're getting more fog this year?
Yeah, so of course, like you said, there might be some recency bias in people's memory where they're thinking, oh my God, never seen a foggy year like this. But
Yeah.
fog was, very common in the 20th century. And I remember one of my professors who lived in Sacramento recounted some of the foggiest nights where he could not see across the street, but he could see the stars above, just showing how low and dense that fog was. And so study out of UC Berkeley that came out in 2019 attributes improving air pollution to a decline in fog. So essentially, there are less microscopic particles being emitted by vehicles and other industry. That means there are less seeds for these cloud droplets to form on. So this is occurring at like a very microscopic level, not something that we can see with our eyes, but a cloud droplet needs something to latch onto. And then if there are less of those out in the sky, then that means the fog won't be as dense. So the number of foggy days may not have changed too much, but the density of the fog surely has.
Interesting. So perhaps all the influx of electric vehicles and different habit changes that have happened in the last couple of decades could be impacting this?
Yeah, of course. And, like I said, there's benefits to the fog, but there's also major hazards. So,
Sure.
less foggy days is a good thing from the standpoint of driving around, but a lot of times, a lot of the crops that were planted in the valley happened when people, sort of populated the area, especially in the 20th century, while we were emitting these dangerous pollutants that are harmful for human health. So it's a great thing that those have been cleaned up. The San Joaquin Valley still actually has some of the poorest air in the nation, but it is a major improvement over 50 years ago.
Sure, and it's kind of crazy to think that the 1980s was almost 50 years ago, which is pretty wild. Well, looking ahead, can we use any of these recent weather patterns to interpret maybe how wet or how foggy the rest of the winter will be here in the San Joaquin Valley?
Yeah, well, I think that would be a bit of a stretch to say, oh, well, we're having foggy days right now. We'll have more foggy days in the future or more rain. In the meantime, while we don't have any storms or strong winds to mix things around, I would definitely expect fog to continue probably through mid-December. It seems like there's maybe a more favorable chance later this month that we could get some storms returning to California. So I think people should ask me in April what I think of the winter forecast. I'm stealing that from one of my mentors. So.
Anthony Edwards, newsroom meteorologist for the San Francisco Chronicle. Thank you so much for breaking this down for us.
You're welcome.
And that is today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden, Carrie Klein, and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. You can find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
How does AI even work? Where does creativity come from? What's the secret to living longer? TED Radio Hour explores the biggest questions with some of the world's greatest thinkers. They will surprise, challenge, and even change you. Listen to NPR's TED Radio Hour wherever you get your podcasts.